Okay, so what brought us to this work? So both Melanie and I teach the student teaching seminar sections for our individual programs. And students are enrolled in student teaching seminar during their 2 semesters of student teaching. And in our discussions with one another about how our courses were going, we realized that we both implemented a practice of journal writing. And so we decided that we wanted to look at our journal prompts and student responses and see where they aligned and what were some of the differences. So why critical journal reflections? It's a best practice that we espouse as educators. It fosters student well-being, so it provides students with an opportunity to process their feelings and experiences. Teaching in general is a very challenging profession, and so especially as new teachers and teachers during this political climate that we're in, students are have a lot of anxiety, are overwhelmed, and it just gives them a space to process those feelings. Within the School of Education, reflection is a core value, so that is something that aligns with our work. And then students who are pre-service students have to complete a Queens College teacher portfolio. It's a summative assessment that they all must complete in order to finish their programs and to get certified. And the entire portfolio is reflection on their teaching, the feedback that they've gotten on their teaching, the assessments that they've created for their students, etc. So in our discussions, we realized that our students really enjoyed doing the journal reflections, that their responses were very thorough in a way that, surprised us. The students were very transparent about the challenges that they're facing, and they demonstrated a true, genuine desire to improve on their pedagogy.
Great. So what is critical reflection for us? I also just want to say this isn't on the slide, but I'm realizing that we're from all across Queens College. So just very quickly that our students are placed in schools all throughout Queens and Long Island to do their student teaching. And this critical journaling that we've asked them to do, these critical reflections, are once-a-week journals that they're engaging with as they're in the school building. So they're in unfamiliar environments, they're there with a cooperating teacher, but they're practicing what their job will be. So that's what they're doing while they're there. And we can talk about that if you want to. But for us, critical reflection is grounded in a few different theorists and scholarship. So, of course, this is related to Freire. Freire writes about critical reflection being a transformational tool, and we certainly believe that, and we attach our prompts and reflections to Freire's work. We also visited this 1994 study that talks about critical reflection, and we drew a lot from that. Dawn Francis writes about pre-service teachers bringing their experiences to the classroom, bringing a wealth of their own life experiences, and we wanted to create space for students to engage with their experiences in relationship to what they were experiencing in the classroom. And then this really important work by Celia Louise and Price Dennis talks about that for pre-service teachers, they often are bringing in some of the problematic beliefs that they hold before they get there, or these assumptions that they hold before they get there. And in critical journaling, we're asking them to unpack some of those assumptions and think about how that is informing their experience in the classroom. So this work is grounded in that scholarship.
So when we analyzed the types of prompts that we gave our students, we came up with 3 different categories. So the first one were practitioner-focused prompts. And so these prompts just ask students to reflect on their pedagogy, what they're noticing in schools, what they're noticing about the way students learn, what they're learning about the different systems that are in place in multiple schools. And then mental health and wellness prompts, just simple check-in prompts, how are you doing, how are you dealing with everything, how are you implementing self-care strategies, etc. And then culturally relevant and sustaining prompts, and this is really a focus on, Melanie said, their assumptions that they have, but then also the different cultures of their students and the various needs of their students and how they are implementing those cultures and identities and needs into the curriculum that they are developing.
And so I really started my seminar with these practitioner-focused prompts. I also teach curriculum and assessment and methods courses in the School of Ed, so I was quite curious about giving them prompts that related to their pedagogy and their instruction. So I have 3 prompts listed here on the left side that I gave students. These asked students to explain a problem they were trying to solve, to consider the lessons that they were teaching, or to identify a school-wide system. I'm always trying to push students to think about policy and their relationship to policy. And so these are just 3 examples of student responses that I'll share. And like Lakisha said in the beginning, what was so interesting is we all know we work with young people. It can be quite hard to get them to like robustly complete assignments, but they were so eager to explain their experience. So this first student says, I need to work on being mindful of time. I need to be sure of how much time I allocate rather than relying on my cooperating teacher. Redirection should be swift. And finally, waiting to get 100% of student attention is not necessary. This was a student who was doing a lot of like, I'll wait, and then just like waiting, right? And she, upon reflection, realized that maybe that wasn't that important. Another student said, I made progress this week by increasing my interactions with students. Little conversations help lighten my mood. My larger class can be overstimulating. This was a student that worked all semester to really improve her practice of engagement with connection with students. And then finally, a student thinking about systems, I found a great resource online that was recommended by the textbook that the school uses. And the strategy helps you to decipher a claim, statement, or TikTok post that you don't fully believe to be true. And I included some pop culture work that made my students laugh. So this was a student engaging with a system in a really positive way.
So for the mental health and wellness prompts, they're at the core of my journaling practice, especially with my graduate students. A lot of them over the course of a year and a half have exhibited a lot of anxiety. A lot of them are career changers. You know, they have children. There are financial obligations, and with student teaching, it's full time. So there are a lot of things that they have to balance, and a lot of them, you know, in office hours and in the journals, it would come out that they have a lot of stress and anxiety. So I would ask questions like, how are you doing? How are you taking care of yourself mentally, emotionally, spiritually? What has this experience taught you about yourself, and how are you becoming more resilient? So one student said, this experience taught me that I'm able to do hard things and to push myself and not give up. I feel that this whole experience will give me resilience in the sense that I have been through the ringer and wake up every day and continue to push myself through the exhaustion and the stress because I know it'll pay off in the end. And this is something I want. I think ultimately the experience is building discipline and proving to myself that if I want something, I will do what it takes to accomplish my goal. And another student said, as for self-care, I'm making sure to lean on my support system, both in my cohort and in my personal life. This experience has taught me that I'm more well-equipped to jump into the public school system, a world I had zero experience in than I thought. And so as their instructor, these responses really bring me joy because these are the life skills that they need to be able to survive as public school teachers. And so another question I asked them in terms of mental health and wellness, what is one thing you can do before next week that will help you to refocus and remember your why? So one student said spending more time in nature, another student said doing independent journaling, and another student said taking on a hobby because she recognized that she likes to be on TikTok and scroll on Instagram, and that type of things made her groggy. So doing something that like physically active to stimulate her. And then the last type of prompt that we gave were culturally relevant and sustaining prompts. And so one question that comes out of the Celia Ruiz and Price Dennis book that we referenced earlier was, what does it mean to show up to your classroom and provide the most humanizing pedagogy you know to offer? So one student said, in addition to admitting our own experiences, educators should be totally present and equipped to tackle difficult or uncomfortable subjects. This commitment needs lifelong learning and a readiness to assist students' growth in a manner that respects their experiences and backgrounds. And this type of response is important to me because so oftentimes teachers try to avoid having difficult conversations, and sometimes because of the political climate, like, their concerns are valid. But I'm appreciative that as a student, she realized that it's really important to touch on these topics in order to support the students. Another student said to provide the most humanizing pedagogy I could offer as an educator would mean to create a classroom environment that is culturally pluralistic, a place where my students feel safe expressing their thoughts and ideas in an open and honest manner, where productive and meaningful relationships are built, where everyone in my classroom understands my expectations for appropriate behavior and respectful communication, and a curriculum that feels relevant and meaningful to most, if not all, students' lives and experiences. And this student, when he was taking English methods, he espoused these ideas, but then as he actually went into student teaching, he started to really doubt if all of this was possible. So to see that he's come full circle and has learned how to navigate this environment was really positive thing to see. And then finally, I look at my students as being human beings who have personalities, emotions, and who are in the process of developing their own self-concept. Keeping this in mind, this allows me to be able to work with them in ways that honor and respect the individuals that they are.
And how beautiful are those? I mean, really. But I want to shift a little bit to the culturally sustaining responses. So I had started in my practice really just with practitioner-focused prompts. And then in working more closely with Lakisha, I started to really critically look at the responses I was getting, and then eventually shifted into more of the mindfulness prompts. But when I looked back at those practitioner-focused prompts, I found that even without prompts that were specifically asking about culturally sustaining and work, students were responding to that in their prompts. So these are responses to practitioner-focused prompts, but you'll notice that students are saying things like, I have a civics class full of ELLs who don't speak any English, they are Spanish natives, I'm a Spanish speaker, I'm using this to my advantage. We see that across the board, that our students who are bilingual or multilingual are able to use their language skills in the classroom, and they are reflecting deeply and critically on what's happening with newcomers in our public school system. Below that, same thing. We have a lot of ENL students whose first languages are Spanish, Chinese, or even Hindi. Some of these students don't speak English, they don't write, they can understand, but their reading skills are behind. We've had that in middle school because our students do one semester in middle school and one in high school. So this student had seen that in middle school, but the difference there was they had a lot of push-in and pull-outs. There was a lot of support. There is not much of that here. So this is a student who was responding to the prompt about systems, but in that response, they were doing some of this work of reflecting on culturally relevant and sustaining pedagogies. And then the last one I just thought was so heartening. I pulled out some of the details, but this student's whole reflection was about a specific student. He said, I want to take some time to talk about my student. When she first started, she was shy, she was timid. He describes in depth the ways in which she was shy and timid, and the hoodie and the whole thing. And over the course of the past few weeks, I've seen her break out of her shell. She greets me every morning, she smiles at me. And this is an example of one of our pre-service teachers really taking the time to get to know a student and have a tremendously positive effect on that student's engagement. So even without these direct prompts, our students are engaging in this work. Which leads us nicely to our findings of analyzing these journals. So when pre-service teachers are given the space to reflect on their practice, they are engaging in critical reflections on their pedagogy. They are engaging in multi-layered reflections on their pedagogy. They are engaging in critical reflection on mental health and well-being, which is a space that I think Lakisha has seen really blossom in her seminar. They are engaging in critical reflection on student and school communities and how that work guides their instruction. So we've been quite heartened to see the level of work that they're doing. And we also find that this is an opportunity to build community amongst peers and support each other through wins and challenges. Do you want to speak to what that looks like in your seminar?
A lot of, like I said, I'll speak about my graduate students. So like I said, they have a lot of anxiety. So when they share the responses, some responses I say like on the prompt, like we will not share out so that they know that it's just, I'll be the only one reading it. But then other times they'll share out and like they're all like in the chat. If it's on Zoom, they're all in the chat like, oh, me too. Like, so they realize like if they feel isolated and like they're the only ones dealing with these issues. But then when they share the prompts, they're all like, oh, really? And then they start sharing ideas and strategies, and it just becomes a really positive, productive environment.
And then this last piece, this deeper connection with supervisors and faculty. So part of our roles in running this clinical work is that we're also working with a team of supervisors who are part-time folks who go into the schools and sometimes full-time folks. Dr. Katz and I are in the schools all the time, watching our students teach and helping evaluate them and see them throughout the semester. But in seeing these journals, we are and our supervisors are able to provide very targeted feedback to our students when they're struggling and when they're succeeding, because we're getting to know them on this much deeper level.
And so what's next? So we really enjoyed doing this work together. So we want to actually do a deeper study next year. So continued and deepen reflective practices within the clinical experience with our students. We were thinking about developing a critical friends practice. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
One of these articles that I talked about earlier does this, and we're thinking a little bit about creating spaces within the cohort to kind of formalize those relationships between students and have them engage with each other's work and reflective journals, and think about mirroring some of the seminal work that led us here.
Mm-hmm. And then we want to do a cross-content study throughout the school year next year, where we align our prompts. And after their initial clinical experience in the fall, we'll analyze them. And then for their full-time student teaching in the spring, we'll develop new prompts. And then at the end of the semester, look at those and compare. And that's it.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
And does anybody have any questions before we take a seat? I'll wait for you to get the mic.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Geske. I'm from the Special Education Department. This is wonderful. Thank you so much for your presentation. I just have a practical question in terms of how you organize the prompts between like the pedagogical, the mental health, and the culturally reflective. Like, do you rotate them? Do you start with one? Like, how do you intuitively plan that out for your students?
So I think we did different things. To be honest, it was not that thoughtful this semester, but we started with I started with practitioner-focused prompts in the beginning of the semester because I felt like that was where they needed to do the most reflection because they were so new. And they needed to be thinking about like, how am I planning? How am I organizing? And then as that became more developed for students, then we moved into the mental health space. But I don't know. I wouldn't say that was like the perfect way to do it. That is just what I did.
And I started with the culturally relevant prompt. So I was like, who are your students? What are their cultural backgrounds? What are their interests? Like, what are you noticing about them? What do they like? Like that kind of thing, just so that they can start looking at the students in their environment. Then I moved into pedagogy, and then I moved into mental health and wellness. And then, just based on the responses every week or like where they are in their student teaching, then choosing a prompt based on that.
That's probably the way to do it.
Thank you. That was inspirational. Thank you. It made me really reflect on, it made me reflect on how much this reinforces maybe your course learning objectives. It reinforces what you want the students to get out of the experience that you're doing. And like you're talking about, what has it taught you about yourself in terms of resilience and certain skills that we want to reinforce in our students, and I'm trying to think about how to get this to happen in my math classes, where I want my students to be thinking about their learning process and not just going from assignment to assignment, but okay, well, what did you learn about yourself in terms of how to approach a question? Because you did it this time, how would you improve that the next time? So it's a really interesting aspect there. And then, I'm wondering, just how to incorporate this. So thank you for sparking that discussion.
That's actually a great idea. Yeah.
Hi, I think this is wonderful, the idea of trying to incorporate just, in a broad array of classes, ways for students to reflect on their learning. I do it in like really small amounts. In my big kind of basic class, it's more at the end of the semester in a feedback survey. But with my smaller class, I have them at the end of each unit write a little, take some class time to write a couple of paragraphs on the main theme of the class and what they've learned and how the definition of some key points has changed. But I think that adding more of that in is great. And like, how do you use class time for that? What are the ways that you get that response? Or is it discussion posts, or how do you do that?
So our seminars are remote, and they are like, the organization of them is sort of non-traditional because our students are in placements. So I don't use class time for them. They turn them in after. But something that I'm glad you brought to the front that has been important for me to make sure that they happen is that they have to be evaluated like very quickly, because then otherwise they think that you're not reading them. And the way that I do that is I'll just like leave comments, and then they get credit for doing it. And the comments are like, "Thank you so much. I love that song too," But they do them separately outside of class, but the feedback is quite quick.
And so I do them at the beginning of class. I do use class time. The class is like 2 hours long. So it's the first 10 minutes of the class. And for me, it helps to set the tone. And especially when they share out, right? Because a lot of them come in and it's tense. And then they share out and they're like, okay, yes, I'm not the only one. This is normal how I'm feeling. New York City's public schools are crazy and unorganized. Like, it's not just where I am. And then that, it's like you see the weight lifted off of them.
I was just going to add something building on what Chris said, and this idea of like, how do we bring this into other classes? One thing that I've tried, and I want to incorporate some more like critical reflection into it, I've been adding a question to my final exam, asking students why they think this class was required in the major. And I have them reflect at the end, like, why is this part of our curriculum? And how are you going to use what we talked about all semester when you go into the field and when you work with families and kids? And give like practical like examples of that. Everybody gets full credit practically unless they don't answer it. But it's one way for them to think at the end of the semester, why did I spend my time doing this? And what did I gain?
Like you spoke a little bit, Lakisha, about they know some things won't be shared and it's confidential, and I can imagine they share some pretty personal things. So can you talk a little bit about how you deal with that? I mean, either of you or whatever.
So for anything that seems super concerning, I always reach out to the student. And then also, my title, I'm a co-director, so my partner, Wendy Tronrud, I always inform her, like, oh, this student mentioned something in their journal, we should follow up. Sometimes we've had to file like student care forms because of that. But yeah, sorry. I go through, so I go through all the prompts, and anything that's really concerning, I meet with the student. And no, and it's the same. It's been like the same students for the past year and a half. So I always look at theirs first, just to make sure, check in, and see how they're doing.